You've been told it's a gift, that feeling everything so deeply, carrying other people's pain like it's your own, reading a room before a single word is spoken, that somehow this makes you special. And maybe part of you believed it for a while, but there's something no one talks about, something that sits underneath the empathy, underneath the sensitivity, underneath that almost supernatural ability to sense what others are feeling. It didn't come from nowhere. You weren't born this way. You were built this way, piece by piece, wound by wound, in rooms where you had to learn to read the emotional weather just to survive. A parent's shifting mood, a silence that meant danger, a home where love was unpredictable, and you, a child with no power and no escape, became a specialist in reading the invisible. You learned to decode tension in a doorway, anger in the sound of keys, rejection in a half-second change of expression, and you got good at it, terrifyingly good. But here's what no one told you. That skill, that deep empathic ability you carry, it wasn't a spiritual awakening. It was an adaptation, a survival mechanism dressed up as a personality trait. And now, years later, you walk through life feeling everything, enduring everything, and you're exhausted. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that lives in your bones. And then comes the other part, the part you probably don't admit out loud. You're alone, not always physically, but fundamentally. You've built a life where closeness only goes so far, where you give endlessly but rarely let anyone truly in, where the walls look like warmth from the outside but feel like a fortress from within. You are a loner, not by philosophy, by necessity, because somewhere deep inside your nervous system made a decision long before your conscious mind caught up, that people are something to be monitored, managed, survived. Never fully trusted. Carl Jung had a term for this. He called it a wounded healer. And he understood something that most modern psychology still struggles with, that some of the most perceptive, emotionally intelligent people on earth did not develop those abilities through growth. They developed them through damage. And that changes everything. Because what happens when the very thing that makes you extraordinary is also the thing that's slowly destroying you? That's what we're going to talk about today. And I need to be honest with you from the start. This one is not comfortable, because if you recognize yourself in what I just described, then you're part of a very specific group. People who feel deeply, withdraw instinctively, and carry a kind of invisible exhaustion that the world never sees. Jung studied people like you. He wrote about them. And what he discovered was this: most of them get trapped. They spend their entire lives cycling between overgiving and complete withdrawal, between the mask of the healer and the loneliness of the wounded, never realizing that the empathy they're so proud of is actually a cage built in childhood. Only a small number break free, not because they're stronger or smarter, but because they're willing to look at something most people spend a lifetime avoiding. The moment the gift was actually a wound. And that terrifies people, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to calling it a blessing when you finally understand what it cost you. So if you're still here, if something in those words landed somewhere deeper than your thinking mind, stay. Because what comes next might be the most important thing you've ever heard about yourself. Let's start where it actually began, not where you think it began, not with the event you've rehearsed 1,000 times in therapy or in your own mind. Before that, before the story you tell, before the narrative you shaped and polished until it sounds almost manageable, there was a moment, and you may not consciously remember it, when your child self made a calculation, not with words. Children don't think in words yet. It was a felt calculation, a body decision. and the calculation went something like this. The people who are supposed to keep me safe are the same people I need to be safe from. And in that impossible contradiction, something inside you split, because a child cannot hold both truths at once. A child cannot say, my mother is dangerous, or my father is unpredictable, and still survive emotionally in that home. So you did something brilliant, something that Jung would later recognize as one of the most sophisticated defense mechanisms the human psyche is capable of. You turned your attention outward, completely. You stopped tracking your own needs and started tracking theirs. Their mood became your weather forecast. Their tone of voice became your early warning system. Their facial expressions became the text you studied more carefully than anything you'd ever encounter in school. And you didn't just observe, you adapted. You shaped yourself around their emotional needs in real time. If they needed you quiet, you became silent. If they needed you cheerful, you performed happiness. If they needed you invisible, you learned to take up no space at all. This is what psychologists now call hypervigilance. But Jung saw it as something more. He saw it as a premature activation of a function that was never meant to come online so early. The child who becomes an empath through trauma is not developing a gift. They are being forced into a role, the role of the one who feels, who senses, who knows, and that role comes at a price that won't become visible for years, sometimes decades. The price is this: you lost access to yourself. In becoming an expert at reading others, you forgot how to read your own inner world. Your own needs became background noise. Your own emotions became inconvenient. Your own desires became secondary to the emotional maintenance of everyone around you. And you carried that pattern forward, out of childhood, through adolescence, into adult relationships, friendships, workplaces, always scanning, always adjusting, always the one who notices the shift in the room before anyone else does, and always, always exhausted by it. Jung wrote about a concept he called the abandoned child archetype. It is the part of the psyche that still carries the original wound, the moment when you realize, perhaps without words, that your authentic self was not welcome. That who you actually were, your real feelings, your real needs, your real reactions, those were too much, too inconvenient, too dangerous to express. So you buried that child, not consciously. The unconscious did it for you, tucked that part of yourself away somewhere deep and dark where it wouldn't cause problems, where it wouldn't get you hurt. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The abandoned child doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in your body, in your reactions, and that strange, hollow feeling you get when someone tells you how strong you are. It waits in the tears that come for no reason at 3 in the morning. It waits in the way you flinch, just slightly, when someone raises their voice, even if they're not angry at you. It waits in the quiet devastation you feel when someone cancels plans and part of you is relieved and part of you is shattered, and you can't tell which feeling is the real one. That child is still running the show, and until you turn around and face it, everything else, every relationship, every achievement, every act of empathy is being filtered through a wound that hasn't been touched. Now let's talk about what you built on top of that wound. Because you didn't just survive childhood, you constructed an entire identity around the survival mechanism, and it's a good identity. It works. People admire it. They come to you with their problems. They say things like, you just get it. You understand people in a way no one else does, and that feels good. Of course it does. Because for someone whose authentic self was rejected early on, Being valued for your empathic abilities is the closest thing to love you've known. But let's be honest about what's actually happening. You are performing a function. You are being the container for other people's emotions because that is the role you were trained into before you could speak. And every time someone praises your sensitivity, every time someone calls you an empath, every time someone leans on you because you just feel things so deeply, they are unknowingly reinforcing the cage. Jung called this identification with the persona. The persona, as he defined it, is the mask we wear for the world. It's not false exactly, but it's not the whole truth either. It's the version of you that gets approval, that functions in society, that people recognize and reward. And for trauma-born empaths, the persona and the survival mechanism are almost identical. Your mask isn't something you put on at work and take off at home. Your mask is the empathy itself. It's the sensitivity. It's the deep feeling. It's the very thing you've been told is your greatest strength. And that's the trap. Because how do you remove a mask that everyone, including you, believes is your face? This is where the loner pattern begins to make sense. Because somewhere inside, you know the truth. You know that the version of you that shows up for others is not the whole you. You know that the empathy is real, but the motivation behind it is tangled. You know that you give not purely from love, but partly from a terror of what happens if you stop being useful. And that knowledge, even when it's half-conscious, even when you can't quite articulate it, that knowledge makes intimacy feel impossible. So you withdraw. Not dramatically, not with slammed doors or angry declarations. You do it quietly, gradually, almost imperceptibly. You stop returning calls quite as quickly. You start preferring nights alone. You notice that after social interaction, even pleasant interaction, you need hours or sometimes days to recover. People think you're introverted, and maybe you are, but the introversion isn't the whole story. The withdrawal is protective. It's your psyche saying, I cannot keep performing this role and survive. Jung observed that many of the most gifted healers, therapists, artists, and spiritual seekers shared this pattern. Extraordinary empathy paired with deep isolation, the ability to hold space for anyone's pain except their own. A public want that masked a private coldness, not toward others, but toward themselves. He saw it in his patients. He saw it in colleagues. And if we're being honest, he saw it in himself. The wounded healer archetype is not romantic. It is a description of a specific psychological configuration where the wound and the gift are so entangled that you cannot access one without disturbing the other. And for most people who carry this configuration, the wound wins. Not because they're weak, because they never realize there's a battle happening at all. Let's go deeper. Because the withdrawal, the loner pattern, the exhaustion, those are symptoms, they're not the core. The core is something Jung spent his entire career circling around, and it has to do with what he called the shadow. Your shadow is not your dark side. That's a popular misreading. The shadow is everything about yourself that you are forced to reject, suppress, or deny in order to survive your environment. For most people, the shadow contains things like anger, selfishness, aggression, the parts of human nature that society finds unacceptable. But for the trauma-born empath, the shadow contains something different, something almost paradoxical. Your shadow contains your real self. Think about that. For most people, the shadow holds the parts they're ashamed of. For you, the shadow holds the parts you were never allowed to be. Your anger, yes, but not just anger. Your needs, your boundaries, your right to say no, your capacity to put yourself first, your ability to walk away from someone who's hurting without feeling like you've committed a moral crime, your right to exist without being useful. All of that is in your shadow, locked away, guarded by the same mechanism that once protected you as a child. And every time you feel that pull toward solitude, every time you retreat from the world, part of what's happening is your shadow trying to get your attention. It's saying there is a version of you that has never been allowed to exist, and I'm running out of room down here. This is why the loner pattern in trauma-born empaths is so different from ordinary introversion. An introvert withdraws to recharge. A trauma-born empath loner withdraws because their entire identity is built on a foundation that's cracking, and somewhere deep inside they know it. The solitude isn't peaceful, it's pressurized. It's a holding pattern. You're alone not because you found yourself, but because you're terrified of what you'll find if you actually look. And here's where it gets really uncomfortable, because the shadow doesn't just sit there quietly. It leaks. It expresses itself in the moments you can't control. The sudden flash of resentment when someone asks you for help, and you smile and say yes, but inside, something screams. The inexplicable anger that rises when someone calls you kind, the way you sometimes sabotage the very connections you claim to want, the relationships you unconsciously choose with people who are unavailable, because unavailable people are safe. They'll never get close enough to see behind the mask. Jung said the shadow will have its day. If you don't integrate it consciously, it will express itself unconsciously. And for the trauma-born empath, that unconscious expression often looks like this. You become the very thing you feared, cold, distant, unreachable. Not because you are those things by nature, but because you've spent so long performing warmth that your psyche has nothing left for genuine connection. You've given it all away, and what remains feels hollow. This is the cycle that traps the vast majority of people in this pattern. Overgiving, then withdrawal, performance, then collapse. Warmth for others, emptiness for yourself, and it repeats year after year, relationship after relationship, until you either break down or wake up. Most people break down. They burn out. They develop chronic health problems. Anxiety disorders, depression that doesn't respond to medication because it's not chemical, it's existential. Their bodies start saying what their mouth never could, no more. And still, even in the breakdown, the pattern persists. Because someone comes to help, and what do? You take care of them. You make sure they're comfortable. You apologize for being a burden. You perform wellness before you've actually healed. And the cycle starts again. So what does it look like for the 1% who actually break through? What separates them from the rest? Jung would say it begins with a single terrifying act. You stop identifying with the wound. That sounds simple. It is the hardest thing a human being can do. Because when your identity, your sense of purpose, your relationships, your self-worth, and your entire way of moving through the world are all built on a trauma response, letting go of that response feels like dying. And in a very real psychological sense, something does die. The persona dies. The mask of the empath, the healer, the one who feels everything. That mask has to come off. And underneath it is not the enlightened true self you might hope for. Underneath it is the abandoned child, terrified, furious, grieving for a childhood that never happened, and completely, utterly alone. This is what Jung called the dark night of the soul. Not a poetic metaphor, a lived psychological experience. The moment when every story you've told yourself about who you are falls apart and you're left standing in the wreckage of an identity that was never really yours to begin with. Most people run from this moment. They double down on the persona. They find new people to heal, new causes to champion, new ways to be useful. They medicate the grief. They spiritualize the pain. They post about boundaries on social media while having none in their actual life. They call themselves empaths and wear it like a badge. never realizing the badge is a brand burned into them by someone who should have protected them instead. The 1%, they stay. They stay in the darkness. They sit with the abandoned child. They let the grief come, not the polished grief of a therapy session where you cry for 50 minutes and then schedule next week, but the raw, ugly animal grief of a child who was never held the way they needed to be held. They let the anger come, not the performative anger of someone setting boundaries for the first time, but the deep, old, almost primal rage of someone who is forced to erase themselves in order to be loved, and they do not try to fix it. That's the key. That is what separates the 1% from everyone else. They do not try to make the pain productive. They do not try to transform the wound into wisdom. Not yet. They just let it exist. They let themselves be broken without rushing to reassemble. They give the abandoned child the one thing it never received: witness, presence, the simple, radical act of saying, I see you. I see what happened to you, and I'm not going to turn away. Jung called this the integration of the shadow. But that clinical language doesn't capture what it actually feels like. It feels like losing your mind. It feels like everything you knew about yourself was a lie. It feels like the ground has disappeared and you're falling and there's no one to catch you, because the person who was supposed to catch you is the one who dropped you in the first place. And it is in this free fall, this terrifying groundlessness, that something new begins. Because when the persona falls away, when the mask of the empath dissolves, when you stop performing sensitivity and start actually feeling, something shifts. The empathy doesn't disappear, but it changes. It's no longer automatic, no longer compulsive, no longer driven by the desperate need to be safe. It becomes a choice. For the first time in your life, you can feel someone else's pain and decide what to do with that information rather than being hijacked by it. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not becoming a better version of yourself, becoming yourself for the first time. And for the trauma-born empath, individuation is particularly brutal because it requires dismantling the very thing the world rewards you for: your sensitivity, your empathic ability, your selflessness. These have to be questioned, not abandoned, but examined. You have to ask, is this really who I am, or is this who I had to become? And you have to be willing to hear the answer. The loneliness shifts too. This is something no one prepares you for. When you begin to individuate, to separate your authentic self from the survival mechanism, the quality of your aloneness changes. It's no longer the pressurized, exhausted withdrawal of someone who's given too much. It becomes something else, something quieter, something that doesn't need to be filled or fixed. Jung wrote about this kind of solitude as a necessary stage in psychological development. He said it is the furnace in which the self is forged. Not the social self, not the performing self, but the actual self. The one that exists when no one is watching, when no one needs anything from you, when there is no role to play and no mask to maintain. That self can only emerge in silence, and that silence can only be bearable when you've stopped running from what lives inside it. For the trauma-born empath loner, this is the turning point. The moment when solitude stops being a symptom and starts being medicine. But you can't skip to this part. You can't intellectualize your way here. You can't read about shadow work and call it done. The body has to go through it. The grief has to be felt. The child has to be met. There is no shortcut. And anyone who tells you there is one is selling something that will keep you trapped. Let's talk about what happens to the body. Because this isn't just psychological. The trauma-born empath carries the wound in their nervous system. Your body learned hypervigilance before your mind had a name for it. Your nervous system was shaped by the unpredictable emotional environment you grew up in, and it still operates as if that environment is current. This is why you're exhausted. Not because you feel too much, but because your body is running a constant invisible surveillance program. It's scanning faces, voices, body language, micro-expressions, room temperature, conversational pauses, everything, all the time, without your conscious permission. And that program was installed when you were too young to consent to it or understand what it would cost you. Jung didn't have the neuroscience we have today, but he intuited this. He understood that the unconscious isn't just a mental concept, but a lived, embodied reality. The shadow doesn't just live in your thoughts. It lives in the tension in your shoulders, the knot in your stomach when someone gets too close, the way your breath goes shallow in a crowded room, the headaches that come after social interaction, the insomnia that arrives when you finally have nothing to take care of but yourself. The 1% who break through don't just do psychological work, they do somatic work. They learn to feel their body again, not as a vessel for other people's emotions, but as their own. They learn to distinguish between their feelings and someone else's. Something that sounds basic, but is revolutionary for someone who has spent their entire life with no boundary between the two. They learn that the exhaustion isn't a personality trait, it's a stress response. And stress responses can be rewired. But here's the part that makes this so difficult. When you start to rewire the nervous system, when you start to come out of the hypervigilant state, the world feels different, threatening in new ways. Because if you're not scanning for danger, if you're not anticipating everyone's needs, if you're not 2 steps ahead of every possible conflict, then who are you and how do you stay safe? This is the question that keeps most people locked in the pattern. Safety and identity have become the same thing. The hypervigilance feels like it's protecting you because once, a long time ago, it was. But now it's a prison, and the bars are made of the very sensitivity you've been praised for your entire life. Let's talk about relationships, because this is where the pattern does its most visible damage, and where the deepest healing eventually happens. The trauma-born empath loner has a very specific relationship pattern, and if you're honest with yourself, you'll recognize it immediately. You attract people who need you, not people who see you, not people who are curious about your inner world, not people who challenge you to grow, people who need to be held, heard, fixed, saved, and you let them in because being needed is the closest thing to being loved that your nervous system recognizes. But there's a second layer. While you're busy being the healer, the listener, the rock, you are simultaneously making sure no one gets close enough to actually know you. You share selectively. You reveal your wounds in ways that are controlled, curated, even performed. You might talk about your trauma openly. You might even be eloquent about it. But there's a difference between talking about pain and letting someone sit with you in it. And that second thing, letting someone truly witness your mess without managing their reaction to it, that's the thing you cannot do. Jung saw this pattern in what he called the anima and animus dynamics, the inner feminine and masculine energies that shape how we relate to others. For the trauma-born empath, these inner figures are distorted. The inner caretaker is overdeveloped. The inner receiver is almost non-existent. You know how to give. You have no idea how to take. And receiving, real receiving, not the polite thank you when someone compliments you, but the deep surrender of letting someone hold you without holding them back, that triggers the original wound. Because the last time you were that vulnerable, that open, that dependent on another person's care, you were a child, and it didn't go well. So you keep people at exactly the distance where they can admire your depth but never test it, where they can benefit from your empathy but never demand that you receive theirs. And if someone gets too close, if someone starts to see behind the mask, you have an arsenal of exit strategies. You get busy. You get distant. You find a flaw in them that justifies pulling away. You create a crisis that redirects attention back to the familiar role of caretaker. Anything to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of being truly known. This is why the trauma-born empath loner is often surrounded by people who swear they're close to you while you feel utterly unknown. You have 100 connections and no intimacy. You are everybody's person and nobody's. And the loneliness of that, the specific sharp loneliness of being completely unseen while being constantly sought out, that is a particular kind of hell that only people in this pattern understand. The 1% who break through learn to receive. That's it. That's the revolution. They learn to let someone in without managing the interaction. They learn to be ugly, to be needy, to be the mess instead of the one who cleans it up. They learn that real love is not earned through usefulness. It just is. And that lesson, which a security-attached child learns before they can walk, the trauma-born empath has to learn as an adult, consciously, painfully, one terrifying moment of vulnerability at a time. Now let's talk about the specific danger that Jung warned about. The danger that makes this pattern genuinely perilous and not just uncomfortable. The danger is inflation. Jung used this term to describe what happens when a person unconsciously identifies with an archetype, and for the trauma-born empath, the archetype in question is the healer, the wise one, the one who sees, the one who understands. When you've spent your whole life being told you have a gift, when people seek you out for your emotional intelligence, when you can walk into a room and know things about people that they haven't told you, it is very easy to start believing that you are special in a fundamental, almost spiritual way. And the moment you do that, you're in danger. Because you've confused a survival mechanism with an identity. You've turned a wound into a throne. And from that throne, you will never heal. You'll just keep performing the role of the enlightened empath, while underneath, the abandoned child grows more desperate, more furious, more alone. Jung saw this happen to healers, therapists, spiritual leaders, people who build their entire lives around their empathic abilities and never question where those abilities came from. They became identified with the archetype. They believed they were the healer, not a person who could heal. And in that identification, they lost access to their humanity, their flaws, their needs, their right to be ordinary. This is the trap within the trap. The first trap is the trauma itself. The second trap is building an identity around the trauma response. And the second trap is building an identity around the trauma response. And the second trap is harder to escape because it feels like freedom. It feels like you found yourself. You go to workshops. You read books about empaths. You take personality tests that confirm your sensitivity, and every piece of validation reinforces the cage. You're not healing. You're decorating the wound. The 1% who break through refuse the inflation. They refuse to be special. They refuse to let their empathy define them. They hold it lightly, as one capacity among many, not as the center of their identity. And in doing that, they do something that feels counterintuitive but is psychologically essential. They become ordinary. They let themselves be normal, flawed, selfish sometimes, bad at feelings sometimes, bad at feelings sometimes. Not the healer, not the empath, not the sensitive one, just a person. A whole, messy, contradictory person who sometimes reads the room and sometimes doesn't, who sometimes gives and sometimes takes, who sometimes feels deeply and sometimes feels nothing at all. That's health, not the elevated spiritual identity, not the empath label. Ordinary, grounded, human aliveness, and for someone who has spent their entire life being extraordinary as a survival strategy, becoming ordinary is the most radical act of healing imaginable. Let's return to the Hermit for a moment, because there's a version of solitude that heals and a version that harms, and you need to know the difference. The harmful version looks like this. You withdraw because you're depleted. You close the door because the world has taken too much. You sit in your quiet home and feel a kind of gray relief, not happiness, just the absence of demand. You tell yourself this is self-care. You tell yourself you're honoring your boundaries, but underneath the relief is a numbness, a disconnection, a slow drift away from life itself. You're not choosing solitude. You're defaulting to it because everything else hurts. This is not the hermit. This is the abandoned child running the show, recreating the isolation of childhood and calling it peace. The healing version looks different. You withdraw because something inside you is asking to be heard. Not the exhaustion, not the depletion, but a genuine inner voice that has something to say. In this solitude, you don't numb, you feel. You don't distract, you confront. You sit with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the anger, the grief, the needs you've never named, the person you might be if you stop performing. This is the hermit archetype as Jung described it. Not a figure of avoidance, but a figure of courage. Someone who enters the darkness willingly because they know the light can only be found there. The hermit doesn't hide. The hermit descends into the unconscious, into the shadow, into the places where the abandoned child has been waiting. And the difference between these two kinds of solitude is not circumstantial, it's intentional. One is running from, the other is turning toward. And only you know, if you're honest with yourself, which one you've been practicing. So here is where we arrive at the question that matters most. Can you do this? Can you be one of the 1%? The honest answer is, I don't know. No one can tell you that. Not Jung, not a therapist, not a video on the internet. The path of individuation is not a program with guaranteed outcomes. It is a lived process that demands everything you have and then asks for more. But there are signs, signs that you're ready, signs that the process has already begun, whether you chose it or not. You started to feel a restlessness that wasn't there before, a dissatisfaction with the role of the empath that confuses you because it used to feel meaningful. You started to notice the resentment underneath the giving. You started to wonder who you would be if no one needed you. You started to feel the exhaustion not just as tiredness, but as a kind of truth. Your body telling you that the way you've been living is not sustainable. If you feel these things, the process has already begun. The abandoned child is knocking. The shadow is pressing against the edges. The persona is starting to crack, and you have a choice. You can patch the cracks and keep going. Most people do. Or you can let the whole thing fall apart and see what's underneath. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he didn't say it was pleasant. He didn't say it was safe. He didn't say it would happen on your timeline or in a way that makes sense while it's happening. He said it was the most important work a human being can do. And then he acknowledged that most people will not do it. Not because they can't, because the cost feels too high. The cost is this: you give up being the empath. You give up the identity that's kept you safe, valued, needed. You give up the certainty of knowing your role in every room. You give up the quiet pride of being the one who feels more deeply than everyone else. And you step into something that has no name, no label, no script. You step into yourself. And the trauma-born empath loner who makes it through this, who survives the dark night and comes out the other side, they don't look the way you'd expect. They're not more sensitive. They're not more spiritual. They're not more empathic. They're less reactive, less hypervigilant, less compulsively attuned to everyone else's interior. They're quieter, steadier. They feel deeply when they choose to, not because they can't stop. They connect with people because they want to, not because they need to prove their worth through emotional labor. They have boundaries that don't need to be announced. They have a calm that doesn't depend on isolation. They have a solitude that is chosen, not defaulted to, and they have something that the performing empath never has, no matter how sensitive they are. They have peace, not the peace of avoidance, not the gray relief of closing the door on the world. The peace of someone who has gone into their own darkness, met the child they abandoned, integrated the shadow they feared, and come back whole, scarred, yes, changed, absolutely, but whole. That is what the 1% looks like, and the path there is not through more empathy. It's through the honest, brutal, redemptive act of finally feeling your own pain instead of everyone else's. So if you're sitting alone right now, and something in these words has found you, really found you in that place behind the mask, behind the performance, behind the basmance, behind the exhaustion, then I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken because you feel everything, but you are not healed because you feel everything either. The feeling is not the finish line, it's the starting point. And the journey from here, the real journey, begins the moment you stop turning that feeling outward and let it come home to you. For you, finally, about you. Jung spent his life mapping the territory of the human soul. He charted the archetypes, the shadow, the anima, the self. He gave us language for things that previously had no words. But even he knew that the map is not the territory, that reading about individuation is not the same as living it, that knowing the pattern is not the same as breaking it. You have the map now. The question is whether you'll walk the path. And if you do, if you're one of the ones who stays in the fire long enough for it to change you, you'll discover something that no amount of theory can prepare you for. That the deepest gift of the trauma-born empath is not the empathy. It never was. The deepest gift is the capacity for transformation. Because someone who has already survived the destruction of their original self, someone who has already lived through the annihilation of safety and rebuilt themselves from nothing, that person has something most people don't. They've already been through the fire once. They know in their bones that it's survivable. And that knowledge, that body-level knowing that you can fall apart and still be here, that is the one advantage you carry into this work. You have already survived the worst thing that could happen to you. It happened when you were small and powerless and alone, and you're still here. The question is no longer whether you can survive. The question is whether you're ready to live.